is also, in my view, a form of violence. And then the more common terms like poverty, alienation. There's another one here, extractivism. You know, what capital is doing now in terms of the exploitation is much more, it goes to a particular part of the world, it extracts what it wants, and then it leaves the place and then goes somewhere else. That's the notion of extractivism. And that has become more and more a reality. It was there all the time, but extractivism has become a kind of a huge way of exploiting the world. So these are some of the things. This is basically a review. But I would like to pose to you a challenge to think about at the heart of violence is, particularly violence in relation to human beings, is the notion of victimization. And I suppose you can also think about the environment as being victimized. But I like this definition by an author with the name of Jacques Derrida, who talks about victimization, and he says that victimization, not the victim, but victimization is such that even the victim doesn't know that he or she is a victim. That is the, in my view, that is the deepest sense of, in my view, of violence, that you don't know anymore because the world has shaped you so much that you think that you're still okay, but in fact, you are not. So when you have time, when you get a slide, just read through this because it's a long argument, it's a long, complicated argument, but essentially the way I understand it is the victimization, more than being exploited, where some people who are exploited can rebel, can fight back. Victimization, the way Derrida understands it, is such that you don't even know. So you know, everything goes like you have forgotten that you have forgotten. This is, I tried to, let's skip this because this is so, the previous professor was much more eloquent than this convoluted argument that I made. But I think the first one here is my working out of the notion of violence. It has to do with violence in terms of economy, which is commodification. At the center of it is victimization. There's a part of it that is culture, it's objectification. And then polity, in other words, governance structures, like bureaucracies. And then cosmos, the universe. So I try to put all of these together. I like to draw. And this is how I try to come to understand the relationships between economic, culture, as a way of making sense out of what this world of violence is for me. And then using the same kind of structure, I have this notion of what I call an ecology of peace, which still uses the same structure, but now it calls for such things as transformation. It calls for issues of radical inclusion, listening and speaking, vulnerability and trust. These are elements for me of an ecology of peace. So in social capital, when we talk about it, trust is a very central piece. And the question in social capital is, how do you develop trust in civil society? And the way when you do that, then you create social capital. So at the heart, we'll talk about this a little bit more. There's also this piece of dialogue. And I play with words a lot, dialogos, because often when we break up the word dialogue, we put dialogue, meaning two talking, right? When in fact it's dialogos, which is moving through something, moving through a meaning, a logos. So dialogue is not just about you and I talking to each other. It has to do, in my view, with walking with each other as we work through that. That's the heart of dialogue for me. So that's part of an ecology of peace. And then I try to develop kind of how do you, what are the kinds of things that go into critical interpretation. What's the method here? And so there is a piece that has to do with analysis, which there has to do with planning, there is engagement, and there is reflection. All of these are related. heart of it is practice, and at the heart of it too is the body. I've always made the argument that the body is the place where we begin to understand how it is that the world shapes us. And as an intellectual background to this, I was interested during my masteral days to try to track the notion of capital. It was at the time when capital moved from, whereas capital or wealth had to do with for example, land. So you knew land. You could see where land is. You knew if somebody owned this, if a capitalist industrialist owned this land or owned this building, that was capital. And then accumulation was you accumulated land, for example. But when capital turned into finance capital, where not only money, but finance, where in fact you could go to your computer and then transfer $1 trillion from one bank to another. Well, how do you track that? So I kind of like wanted to find out where capital was going, because my understanding was if I understood where capital was going, I would know how to fight it. But how can you fight a bank, right? So, but I thought to myself, well, I looked into the literature and I tried to find folks who were talking about where capital, what kinds of texts did capital use. And for me, what I've learned from my feminist friends and colleagues is that it actually is inscribed. Capital is inscribed on our bodies. Like in Japan, when I was teaching, students graduation gifts for college, many Japanese who were wealthy enough to do this, was what they called aesthetics. That was they would have surgery to have their noses become a little more higher, right? Skin a little bit tighter and all of that, because capital valued a certain kind of beauty. But so if you had, like mine, a short nose, I would never qualify as beautiful. So in order to become beautiful, I had to have surgery. And I tell you, I don't know if it's still true now, but when I was teaching in Japan quite a few years ago, many of my students, the parents' gift to them was to have the surgery so that their job prospects would be better. That is what I call the inscription of capital on the body. So I figured then I will look at where the bodies are. So when you look, for example, at domestic helpers, quote unquote domestic helpers, you know that that's where capital is going, because it is inscribing what is valuable in this particular group of people, which is their labor and their bodies. In human trafficking, you look at what kinds of sexual exploitation are there. Then you know that capitalism tends to also inscribe on gender sexualized realities of our bodies. That's how I wanted to track it. And so when I think of social capital today, and a critical theory of peace, I would always start with the experience of the body. It matters if you are tall, it matters if you are short, it matters if you are not so short, and besides, when you grow older, you shrink, right? If you look at my pants now, my pants are now a little bit longer than, because I have shrunk. I was tall before. But, that's not the function of capital. I was just saying that the body changes. That's also to wake you up. Okay, now, let's go to the, after all of that background, let's talk a little bit about social capital. First, capital defined. So capital, this is where the kind of like the text is, and this is where kind of my summary. So capital is a relationship. It is not a thing in itself, it is a relationship which is a medium of exchange. It has store value. That is to say, if you store it, it has value. And the question is, what do we value, right? We'll come back to the way that human beings address it as well. But it has store value, and it has a power, the ability to exert influence in a source of energy. So capital as a relationship actually has energeia in it, or dunamis. Which is why sometimes when I'm not very serious, I think of capital as it's like the Holy Spirit. You don't know where it is, but you can feel its power. And then capital is anything that increases one's ability to generate value. So, if I value the mobile phone, then it adds value. And that's why advertising is such that they're trying to say, this is what you need, this is what is valuable, because it's trying to create value. So we have some control over that. We need to think about what is valuable to us. But we'll talk about that more. Capital has many forms. There is the cultural capital, there is symbolic capital, there's social capital, and then there's economic capital. And we'll move it too quickly. I'll skip that one. This is Bourdieu. I'll skip through that because I think I have a place here where, yes. Okay. Economic capital consists of those economic possessions that increase an actor's, I said this already, including class, capacities in society, including both the means and relations of production, distribution, consumption, or wealth as surplus value. In other words, capital is when you are able to accumulate, and it has value more than what it is that you need. So, for example, what would be an example of surplus value? If I a museum artifact that is 500 years old, some people will buy that for $10 million. Okay? But actually, when that artifact was produced, it probably didn't cost anything. But surplus, the system is such that because it values history, it says tradition is important, etc. So it tries to classify, and it says, okay, so here is this artifact that now costs or is valued at $10 million. So you've already gained, you've accumulated already the kind of value over the way that that piece of artifact was created. So in the economic world, it's always working to increase the value and to maximize surplus. Right? Another example of this is shoes. It may take $3 to put together to make a shoe, but they will sell it because there's a Louis Vuitton. Does Louis Vuitton have shoes? Prada. So Prada will have Prada shoes, and it is more expensive than Converse, because society has said no. Prada is of course much better than. There's more status in Prada than in Converse shoes. Cultural capital can exist in three forms: in the embodied state, in the form of lasting dispositions of the mind and body; in the objectified state, in the form of cultural good, pictures, books, dictionaries, instruments, machines, which are the trace of theories, of critique of these theories, problematics, etc. And in the institutionalized state, a form of objectification which must be set apart because as in education, it confers entirely original properties to the cultural capital, which is presumed to guarantee. So a PhD, a master's degree, is actually a form of cultural capital. It's not just something that it has value because it will open your world to other areas that are normally closed to those who do not have the master's degree. So let's think later, we'll think a little bit about what are some of those realities, institutionalized realities that confer a certain kind of value that gives us privilege. Right? Flying in economy class in an airplane and business class confers a certain kind of status. So once in a while, because I travel a lot, I am upgraded. And usually when you're upgraded like the last. The ones who pay for the business class, they're there first. So when you come in last, or when you are sitting in economy and somebody, the stewardess will say, oh, Dr. Ruiz, please, come and you are valued because you have this card that says you are the highest tier of your travel mileage. Please, we will move you to business class. And as we move you to business class, people look at me and say, so here's the one who didn't pay for it. So I'm joining them, but I was given a value that they did not think was valuable. So they have the cultural capital and the economic capital. I don't, but I'm still there with them. So it causes conflict. So when we're thinking social capital later, we think about flying business class when you don't pay business class fee. And then you have a sense of what cultural capital might be like. Okay. Symbolic capital, which is, this is a Bourdieu term, is nothing other than capital in whatever form when perceived by an agent endowed with categories of perception arising from the internalization or embodiment of the structure. This is what I was just talking about. So a master's degree is partly symbolic as well as cultural. It's symbolic because the MA in your diploma says that you have a certain kind of capital that you can exchange. And then the social capital is the sum of the resources, actual or virtual, that accrue to an individual or a group by virtue